You're sitting at home, minding your own business, scrolling through social media, when suddenly you feel something strange. Your feet leave the floor. What's happening? Your phone slips out of your hand and floats away. You quickly realize there's no time to think. There's no warning. It all happened so fast. You look up just in time to see the moon, and it's hurtling towards you, growing larger and larger. It's coming right for you. What do you do now? Welcome back, everyone. Here, we try our best to answer the great geographic what-if questions of the world. Today we ask, what if gravity vanished for just 5 seconds? First, some bad news. Earth is held together by one force, gravity. This keeps us grounded, allows water to exist in liquid form, and keeps our planet rotating in orbit around the sun. It also keeps Moon in orbit around the Earth, which actually makes more of an impact on our lives than you might think. The moon affects the tides because of its gravitational pull. So without gravity, not only would we be sent hurtling into outer space, but our oceans would boil and evaporate into the atmosphere. But let's ignore the fact that our oceans would be in serious trouble. And for the sake of a fun movie and a thought experiment, let's assume that Earth's rotation and orbit remains unaffected. If gravity disappeared for just 5 seconds, every object on the planet would be affected equally. For a split second, objects would weigh nothing. During this time, people would be able to walk on air, buildings would scrape the sky, and birds would be flung into outer space. But after the initial shock of suddenly being weightless, we'd have to deal with something much more dangerous. While gravity kept everything firmly planted on Earth's surface, it also stopped things from floating away into the atmosphere. Without gravity, this wouldn't be an issue for most objects, but Earth's atmosphere itself would start floating away. In fact, Earth's atmosphere would simply drift into outer space and vanish, leaving us without the very air we need to survive. We only have about 5 seconds to find another way to breathe before Earth's atmosphere was completely gone. To put this into perspective, 5 seconds is enough time for a person to travel around the entire equator along Earth's surface 3 times. But the Earth's atmosphere would float farther away from the planet than any human could ever hope to travel in 5 seconds. If you were on top of Mount Everest, which is the tallest point on Earth's surface, you could take a big deep breath and inhale pure oxygen. You'd have to do this pretty quickly though, because once the atmosphere started drifting upwards, it would be harder and harder to get a good breath. Not only that, but all the air would be pushed out of your lungs. You would have to consciously push to get air into your lungs and then even harder to exhale it. Even the strongest athletes would struggle to breathe while standing on the peak of the world. The effects of Earth's atmosphere floating into space would be felt by anyone and everyone. People in submarines would be unable to dive any deeper because the pressure of the water would crush their lungs. Meanwhile, those on the surface would gasp for breath as they watched the atmosphere drift away above them. So if you were near the ocean, you'd either drown or be crushed by the sudden pressure change. But if you happened to be standing next to a rocket ship, you'd witness something incredible as the rocket blasted off and headed straight for space. Rockets work by burning fuel and expelling it at high speed out of a nozzle, creating thrust that drives the rocket forward. But rockets can only go as fast as the fuel will allow. The powerful gravitational pull of Earth holds rockets back. But without gravity, rockets would be able to launch into space faster than ever before. You'd watch in awe as the rocket flew past the atmosphere, went through the vacuum of space, and disappeared into the inky blackness of the universe. But how long would you actually have to watch this spectacle? Well, the rocket couldn't stay in contact with Earth forever. Eventually, the rocket would reach the edge of space, which is where cell phone signals and radio waves stop reaching. So within 5 seconds, you'd witness a rocket fly through space and disappear from view. But the rocket isn't the only thing that would disappear. The International Space Station would begin to drift away from Earth too. In space, there's no friction or drag. This means that an object in motion will stay in motion indefinitely. The ISS orbits the Earth at around 28,000 kilometers per hour. And without gravity holding it back, the ISS would continue to move forward, taking it further and further away from Earth. You'd watch helplessly as the space station became smaller and smaller until it was just a speck in the distance. And if you had a telescope, you could see it continue to move forward, going further into space than any human has ever gone before. But you wouldn't be alone in witnessing this incredible sight. Every object on Earth would be affected by the lack of gravity. Cars would drift away from the planet, flying through the air like gigantic metal birds. Planes would soar hundreds of kilometers into the sky, eventually breaking through the clouds and disappearing from view. People would be able to run on water, jumping across the ocean like it was a frozen lake. But the Earth's atmosphere would continue to float upwards. This would mean that the water would soon be out of reach. Soon, you'd be surrounded by nothing but the cold vacuum of space. So, with the earthbound scenery disappearing from view, what else would you see? Well, the rest of the solar system would start to become visible. Planets like Jupiter and Mars would shine brightly in the sky, looking almost close enough to touch. But these distant gas giants are so far away, they appear no brighter than the stars twinkling in the night sky. The closest planet, Venus, would be the brightest object in the sky after the sun and the moon. You'd be able to see Mercury, too, but it would look much smaller. The sun would remain fixed in the sky, giving us a false sense of security as it continued to shine down on an empty planet. The Earth's atmosphere would eventually stop floating upwards and begin drifting sideways. The air would flow around the globe, eventually forming a thin layer on the side opposite the sun. On the side facing the sun, there would be no atmosphere left, meaning you'd be exposed to the deadly radiation of the star. On the opposite side, you'd be met with a different kind of hell. The air would be so thin that it would be hard to breathe. It would be like trying to suck air through a straw. The temperature would plummet, causing the remaining water on the planet to freeze. The ground beneath your feet would shake as giant ice sheets cracked and rumbled. As you struggled to breathe, you'd watch in horror as the atmosphere flowed over the planet. Eventually, it would return to the other side, leaving you gasping for air on a frozen wasteland. You'd feel the temperature rise as the sun moved across the sky. Soon the ice would melt and you'd be left knee-deep in water, still struggling to breathe. Then, the atmosphere would flow away again, leaving you stranded on an icy rock in the middle of a vast, empty space. You'd watch as the planets moved across the sky, knowing that you're completely alone. There would be no sound to break the silence. That is, until the moon drifted closer. It would grow larger and larger until it loomed over you, filling your vision. Then the unthinkable would happen. The moon would crash into you. The impact would be so great that it would shatter the moon into pieces. The fragments would form a ring around the Earth, each piece of debris orbiting the planet. You'd watch in awe as the debris rained down onto the Earth, covering the planet in a blanket of rock and dust. This would block the sun's rays, plunging the Earth into darkness. You'd feel the temperature drop, and the last of the water on the planet would freeze, turning Earth into a barren, lifeless rock. And then it would be over. 5 seconds had passed, and gravity would return. You'd feel the ground beneath your feet as the debris from the moon pulled you back to the surface. You'd look up to see the moon in its rightful place in the sky, shining down on an empty planet. Earth would be left in ruins, stripped of its atmosphere and covered in a blanket of debris. It would be a lifeless rock in the middle of a vast, empty space. But now it's time for you to make your voice heard. Comment below and tell us what we should do. Should we try and restore Earth to its former glory? Or should we abandon it and search for a new planet to call home? Either way, one thing is for sure, we won't be alone in the universe. Because as we drift further and further away from our destroyed home planet, we'll be joined by the remnants of Earth's atmosphere. We'll be carried into space together, leaving behind the only home we've ever known.